it was a bit of a wake up call in a good way. Yeah, it just like made you think like, oh, you know what? Like, am I building my business the right way? Like, can I actually take a hit like this again? Like, I could not take a hit like this again. Can I be prepared for the next time something like this happens? Absolutely.
Welcome to the Think Splendid YouTube channel. My name is Lynn Stevens, and I'm the founder and CEO of Think Splendid, where we provide business strategy for luxury wedding and hospitality brands. In celebration of 15 years in business, I'm sitting down with 20 wedding industry leaders from around the world to discuss the realities of owning an event business in 2020. These splendid conversations are honest, candid, and authentically optimistic. In this episode, I chat with Paras Mehta, the founder of Paras Events, a luxury event design firm based in Toronto, Canada. Paras and I talk about taking government assistance to keep his business afloat during the pandemic, what happens when you reach a point where you are more expensive than your previous client circles can afford, creating offerings for lower price point markets when you are a luxury brand, cultural expectations around negotiating, and more. Here's our conversation. Enjoy. How are you?
I'm good. We're trying to fill our calendar, to be honest. It's taken a lot of effort, but it's funny. I haven't done so many birthdays in my entire career.
Right?
Yeah. It's a cool change though. Like usually we're like used to these like big productions with like these giant load in and load out schedules. And now it's like, we do that for a smaller event and we're like, oh, are we already done yet? Like, is it like we can go home already? Like it's a weird feeling sometimes. Like I'm posting events that I did like a year or two ago. Just to like get like content out there. I'm not actually producing those live. It's not like how it was before where you could like post what you were like doing live. And my whole feed from this year is like half of it is like stuff from other years.
Right. Which is a benefit if you can do timeless design.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
All the people who tend to do super on trend stuff, probably that's hurting them because, those mason jars haven't been in for a while.
No, and as they should, they need to be repurposed in some way, those mason jars.
So if you could tell us about how you got started in the industry, because you have that education in interior design. You've been doing this for 17 years. You're still young. And I say that because I think we're about the same age. Maybe I'm a little bit older, but I'm still young until I turn 40.
Same here. So. I started my countdown though. Can you believe it? I was like, COVID has given me an opportunity to think about what I need to finish in the next 2 years before I turn 40.
Same.
I just feel like my mind's been going in like lots of other places that usually doesn't have time to go to. I started when, actually I've always been in events for a very long time. Like I was in a student council, on prom committee, all of that. And I didn't realize at the time that events were a career option. It was never introduced to me, nor was it like something in school that were like, you know what, you could be in event management, you could be in hospitality management, travel. Like those are just not options that were presented to us. And so I fortunately in high school, we had interior design and drafting and AutoCAD courses. And that's where I really decided I want to be an interior designer. For the longest time, I wanted to be a teacher or a meteorologist. And I decided in grade 11 and 12 that interior design was the route I was going to take. And then when I went to design school, I continued to be involved with events. And that's the first time I was actually introduced to events as a career option. So when I completed school, I was working as a design assistant for another event design firm. I knew in university that events is where I wanted to go, but I wanted to get some experience to really understand if this was the path I wanted to take. I took a course in floral design, and I also took the Wedding Planners Institute course in wedding planning. And for 2 years, I thought I wanted to be a wedding planner, but I realized very quickly that that was not what I wanted. It was the design element that really attracted me to the actual event world. And so a lot of people don't know, but my mom is my business partner, continues to be my business partner. Even though she's retired, she's like here in spirit in our office every day. And she is really the first person, given her design background, who introduced me to just design disciplines, just really the world of design and the possibilities. And so when we started the business in 2003, I was 21 years old and really no business acumen at all. I didn't know a single thing about business. And I think through experience, I have a better understanding of it. I think I definitely have made all of those errors that I continue to make them, but I've made all those errors that have really helped me to get the business education that I guess one gets when they're in a business environment. But I think overall, I guess you could say light bulb moments, those like really like standout moments was getting that first big job. My first big job was a Sweet 16 birthday party, and I thought this was like the one, like this was my big break. Like I was gonna pull out all the stops. I would never show anyone pictures of that event ever, but it was like my first like opportunity to show what I could do, and through my like temple and my community, that's where all my first clients came from. Like I did weddings within our like community group and within our temple group, and it kind of just went from there. All of those clients turned into more clients. I realized that my events were my portfolio. They were my way to market my ideas to people, and my business just kind of grew from there. And I think for me, I'm still challenged with this, unfortunately, but age is a really difficult thing for me. I do go into a lot of opportunities, and I think people have a look at me and they're like, I don't know if you can handle my event. You don't look like someone who has the experience to do it. And so I still I try to dress differently. I try to do all these things, but I still continue to work around that and see if and I just get kind of caught in that little bit of a hamster wheel of like, don't like judge me by my age. Like I'm very capable of working on your event. And so that was like a big hurdle for me at the beginning. But overall, that's kind of how I started. And I things just kind of naturally evolved. And I feel like every year was a learning experience. It continues to be. And just when I think I have things figured out, I have to reinvent again.
Right.
Yeah.
This year, I think, is doing that for everyone.
Really. It's like just when you thought you had it figured out, January comes along and you're like, okay, so how are we gonna reinvent again? How are we gonna like change? Because it really like I feel everything just changes every year. I don't actually think things stay the same as much as I might think they do. I do have to like reevaluate what I'm doing every year. And sometimes it is a bit exhausting because you feel like, when is it going to be enough, kind of? But then you realize that maybe it's just not that way at all. And you just have to keep on reinventing.
Yeah, I think the people in the industry who feel that they've arrived and they can sort of rest back and rest on their laurels
Mm-hmm.
are the ones who don't stay relevant and get overlooked, and then they don't know why. They can't figure it out. And I always think about there were a few designers and planners and some other industry people who were really big names in 2006, 2007, 2005. And then after the recession, like no one who started in the industry 2010 or later knows who they are. Like they're not the it girls anymore or the it guys, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not because they're not talented, but I think it's because in some cases they let ego get in the way and they drank their own Kool-Aid and they thought that that success they were enjoying and that level of, adulation and press and money that they were enjoying was going to stay consistent forever.
Okay.
And it doesn't work that way. Okay. And some of them are still in business, some of them aren't, but they aren't the names that people know now.
Right.
And I do see that mistake being made with some of the people who have started in the last 5 to 10 years, who have really built a name for themselves, and again, are very talented, but they're sort of setting back into that, okay, it's always going to be this good, and this year's just a blip, but people know who I am, so I don't have to try anymore. And it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't. And I mean, I say it doesn't because I know it doesn't. And I've experienced it, just like you're saying, like taking that step back is not a good idea. Like it's not until you see like one of your competitors like race past you and you're like, oh shoot, like, and that shouldn't be the light bulb moment, but that is when that light bulb kind of hits. And I feel like, I just feel like in my instance, like I've always felt a little bit, how would I describe it? Like, I feel like I've always been racing, kind of. I've always been like trying to like chase this. I don't even know what it is. Like, just when I'll achieve something that I've been like working really hard on, but it'll always be like, what's next? Okay, what's next? And it feels that way. And like you said, it wasn't enough to just, it's not enough to just be like, okay, like this is what I wanted, this is where I am. Let's leave it as is. Like, I totally get what you mean by you've become irrelevant, and then you don't realize that you have until someone who you can consider a competitor has surpassed you, and then you're like, wait a minute, what just happened here?
Or sometimes someone you never considered a competitor, and you're like, them? Whatever. I don't have to worry about them. And then all of a sudden, they're getting all the magazine features, they're getting all the interviews, they're getting all the jobs, they're getting all the clients. And you're like, wait, what? Those clients don't have good taste. But that person got really good at the job and you rested back. So yeah, it's going to overtake you.
That's right. And when you say it, it seems so like obvious, but like when you're in it, you're like, what just happened? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I'm guilty of that too. I think all of us are.
It was very eye-opening for sure. Like, I think, at least for me, I was just like so busy in the day-to-day routine of like being a designer and a business owner that it's very seldom that I stopped to actually like look at what I was actually doing. And this experience has helped me like analyze what actually was not working and what was working. And it was a bit of a wake-up call in a good way.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's just like made you think like, oh, you know what? Like, am I building my business the right way? Like, can I actually take a hit like this again? Like, I could not take a hit like this again. Can I be prepared for the next time something like this happens? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's good that you are thinking that way because, I mean, you went through 2008 as well. But there were a lot of people who learned from 2008 and are better off this time. And there are a lot of people who did not. And this time hit them just as hard. I mean, it hit everyone hard. I don't want to say that. But I think it hit them maybe a little bit harder in ways that they had been hit before. Whereas everyone else who weathered that and learned from it and like put strengths in those areas, now they're like, oh, there's new weaknesses we have to address.
Yeah, no, totally. And I just feel like in 2008, like I was only like 5 years in, so like I was already screwing things up to begin with. And so like 2008 just felt like I was rolling with the punches, but this time I felt like, oh, you know what, I'm in the game. Like I feel like I'm doing things right. And so I feel like 2008 didn't maybe mess with my head as much as like 2020 is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It didn't hit me because I didn't know any better at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there are a lot of people in that boat now who are going to be very successful in 5-10 years because they're starting now and they don't have anything in their head of how it's supposed to be. They just know it's bad and they're going to make it work because either they got laid off from their regular job, or I think for people who can tolerate risk, now is a great time to start a business if they have a financial cushion and that ability to tolerate higher levels of stress.
Yes, definitely. That's a whole other whole other criteria for that.
Right?
You're right. I totally understand. It's like, I mean, I'm working with government assistance right now to keep my like daily flow going. And I mean, I have to return that money within 2 years. That's the program we have in Canada. And so that has allowed us some cushion. Now, I already operate pretty lean. I don't have what I guess you could say like a giant corporation, like I have multiple full-time employees or anything like that. I'm a business where it's like 4 of us all the time and everyone else is freelancers. So I, through government assistance, have been able to really like try to keep as many people employed as possible with us. And unfortunately, my freelancers and contractors, there's just isn't enough work because we're not booking events. So there's not much I can do for them, but at least for my core team, I've been trying my best to keep everyone in some kind of stable place.
In the US, there's 2 big loans, the EIDL and the PPP loan. PPP was Paycheck Protection Program, and that one was if you spent a certain amount on keeping employees on board, that amount would be forgiven. It was all very complicated, but a lot of those do have to be paid back, and you can only spend a certain percentage on overhead, like a warehouse for rentals or that kind of thing. And
right.
It's very complicated. And then on the non-business level, just for citizens, I think if you made less than a certain amount last year
okay,
in income, you got the stimulus relief check, which I think was $1,200 or something like that.
Okay.
One time, not helpful.
One time.
One time, not helpful. But it was based on last year, and it was designed for people who would continue to have that same level of income this year. So I think it was like the threshold was something like $100,000 or $150 maybe. But it was something where a lot of people in the event industry did really well last year. And their income was higher, but now that income's gone, but they still didn't get that $1,200 because it's counting on you keep having that same income this year because you kept the job, and that's not
reason
for a lot of people.
It doesn't work for a lot. No. We and so how are companies in the US managing that? Like, are there other programs for them, or is it really that's the only one, and if you don't qualify, you don't qualify?
On the federal level, it's those, the EIDL and the PPP. State levels have some, depending on which state you're in, and then there are grants and other things based on like Chamber of Commerce or the city you're in or organizations you might be tied to. One of the things so this has hit the wedding industry hard, event industry hard, entertainment, hospitality, all of that. Obviously, and what we do overlaps with all of those. I think the entertainment industry has been hit hard, but they have, in the US, they have the benefit of unions. So they have insurance through a union. They have some of those protections that a union can provide. And the event industry doesn't have unions aside from certain
venues or
whatever, the laborers. So there's no like event industry, you can be in this union or this association and be on the shared health insurance plan. And it's not covered here. If you pay that out of pocket, even for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, and which is not very affordable, but they can't block you for pre-existing conditions. It's a mess here. The whole, like, I have friends from Canada who say, they're like, we are very, very conservative, but like the healthcare just seems obvious. I'm like, I know.
I know, it's so funny that you say that, because I think that's what a lot of us think up here. It's like, I guess it just seems so simple to us, but obviously there's a lot that that is involved. But like from the outside, I think we're just so used to it being a certain way. Like this is how we've grown up, always having it taken care of, that we don't. It just seems so simple, but I know it's not. But it just feels that way.
It's simpler than we make it. I will say that.
Yeah.
Everyone else has figured it out to some degree, hybrid or whatever. But anyways, no, so those are the two main ways to get help. And then I think people are just doing what you're doing, which is trying to fill their calendar and a lot of birthdays and a lot of backyard celebrations. And some of them are taking on the big events and just keeping it to themselves and not posting it online, which is, I think as far as liability is concerned, right now they're saying you won't be liable, but I think that's not really until precedent is set with a huge lawsuit.
Yeah.
That's not going to change anything.
We just found out on Thursday, so a few days ago. So they had eased some of the restrictions for our province in Ontario. And on Thursday, we had to go and reduce again because our numbers started to climb again. And so now we're back at a reduced amount, and not as severe as like our stage 1, stage 2 amounts. But what was happening was a lot of these celebrations and were happening, and not that they're the singular cause of the increase, but it was one of the factors of why the numbers were going up again. And so our premier rolled us back on Thursday. So it actually became very unfortunate. It became a very difficult situation for any weddings that were occurring just this past weekend, because we were allowed to have up to like between 50 to 100, whether it's indoors or outdoors. And so we have to, of course, be physically distanced within that count. But that announcement came on Thursday, and it got rolled back to between, I believe it was 10 to 25. So any weddings on the weekend who had RSVPs for up to like 50 to 100 people, it just became such a huge challenge of how do you edit this. And I don't obviously know this for a fact, but I feel like I'm sure some of those weddings still went through without. I'm pretty certain some of those happened. And we also were notified by the premier that the host of an event would get a minimum fine of $10,000, and every guest in attendance would be fined $750. So we didn't really have those kinds of we had a penalty, but now he's like we're not playing games. Like, this is what's going to happen if you mess around. Yeah. So it got a bit intense over the last few days again.
I know in the UK it's doing that as well.
Or
not to that extent, but with the counts. Like today, I think it got raised to 15 people or something like that from 6. People are freaking out. Obviously, it's a hard place because, this isn't just a flu. It's a really devastating disease, and some people get it much more mild than others, thankfully.
Right.
But we've seen, especially here, if it doesn't get handled on a public health level the right way, I mean, we just passed 200,000 people who have died from it. That's 200,000 families and friend networks,
right.
And that's just here. Mm-hmm. And it's really devastating. You mentioned that you got your start doing a lot of events for the people in your temple community, which I think is the community aspect is very common for people in the industry. They get started because they're talented at something, and they are the person that their friends know can do that. Like, that's part of my story. I think that's part of everyone's story of like, oh, you can do this. Can you help me with this? Like, you're good at this. Da, da, da. Can you talk a little bit about growing with that foundation? And then also, because you're nationally known throughout Canada, but you're also internationally known. And at some point when you have to raise prices maybe beyond what a community is accustomed to, that may not be the case for you. But I know a lot of people get into it because, again, their friends know they can do this and they start out with the very well-intentioned idea of, I'm going to be the affordable wedding designer. I'm going to be the affordable wedding photographer. And then they find out, like, oh, no one's getting married Tuesday through Thursday.
That's right.
I have a finite amount of days and a finite amount of time. And I can't do that by being affordable to these people. And now I'm going to be affordable to these people. But sometimes that can hurt feelings and all of that. So did you have to go through that transition at all? And if so, can you tell us about how you handled it?
Yeah, I totally did. Working in my temple community, there was an expectation that there would be like a reduced fee or a reduced price because they were friends or friends of the family. So already there was that expectation. I kind of knew going into it that that was going to come up at some point in the conversation. And I think for me, though, at the time, I was focused on doing something different in my demographic here. So when I first started in 2003, the idea of an event designer didn't really exist. It wasn't commonplace. It like if you said you were an event designer, people were like, "What is that?" Like it just wasn't common. And I mean, more so for event planners. No one in my demographic here, not no one, but very few people had wedding planners. And so I would say that fortunately for us, that education is out there and couples, clients come to us knowing fully well what a wedding planner, what an event designer, wedding designer does. So part one of my strategy was informing people that I'm an event designer and what does that mean. So I had my little like PowerPoint presentation and I would like literally like go through the difference with a couple. And then I would explain to them, like, I already knew that the budget thing was going to be a concern, a discount is going to be expected. So I didn't even try to avoid it. I just went full on in it. And I had to acknowledge and like really tell myself, and like at that very moment, how am I going to get my business out there? And for me, sometimes it meant doing an event at cost because I knew who was going to be in that room. I knew who the attendees of that wedding were going to be, and I wanted those people to see my work. So if that meant I had to take a hit on my profit margin or sometimes truthfully break even, I accepted that. I wanted those particular people to see my work because not only did I want to get work, but I wanted to show the right work. I wanted to show what the difference between having just a backdrop, head table, and cake table was versus having a full experience of an event design. And I probably did, truthfully, 2 to 3 seasons where I was doing stuff for profit or under or break even because I really wanted to build my portfolio and show what I could do. And also, just because I was doing an event for my temple or my community didn't mean all the attendees of that event were within my community. So I was then furthering my reach by all of these other demographics seeing my work and my ability. And truthfully, from there, my business started to grow. I got my first big corporate event from doing a wedding. And I still do that event to this day. I've been doing that event for, not 17 years, but 16 years. I'm not doing it this year. But what was so great about those early years was I felt like I was onto something. I felt like, you know what, I am going in the right direction. I might not have the business acumen to be making all the right decisions, but I knew that I wanted my business to be known as a business that was design focused, that I was an event design firm, I'm not gonna come by and do a few balloon arches for you and call it a day. Like I wanted it to be a full experience, a customer service experience, an event experience. I would say that I started at a time where maybe it was easier to do that in my demographic. I always joke that if I started to do what I do today, it would be harder in my market, in my demographic here, or in my geography rather. And back then, even though I had to really educate and help people understand what an event designer and the role of event designer is, it would be although it'd be easier to describe what I do today, but the number of event designers in Toronto now are astronomical. So it's much harder to stand out, in my opinion, in my market at this time. So I do think in some instances that it was like a bit of a right place, right time kind of scenario too. But overall, that's kind of how I grew the business, and really referral. I didn't have Instagram or social media in that time. Nobody did in that time. And I really had to rely on really high quality referrals from the weddings I was doing.
Right. You're known for doing the cultural and fusion events. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of people who want to do those types of events, but they're not sure how to convince the clients that they can do them. So can you first define what a fusion event is for people who may not be familiar, and then talk about your approach to them?
A lot of the weddings we do are cultural events. So they're, in my case, of South Asian descent. So that's India, parts of India, around India. It's also categorized as a fusion event if it's two cultures coming together. So I do a lot of weddings that are cross-cultural that way. And to me, it was a little bit easier because I understand the customs and traditions being of the culture myself, but I'm using the right terminology. I used to do sample critical paths in my proposals to show to show clients that I actually knew what I was doing. Like, again, like I mentioned before, age has always been a bit of a deterrent for me. So I've always had to pad my proposals, my design proposals, with extra content, sample production schedules and things like that, to show my clients that I have the ability and experience to understand the intricacies of producing an event, cultural or not. A cultural event is usually multi-day as well. So we're not just focused on one event day. It could be up to a 5-day celebration. I do work with higher budgets as a result, but one of the, I guess you could say, misconceptions is multiple events might mean higher budget, but we have to be so wise how we spend that money, because we have to take that budget and spread it over 5 events. A lot of my colleagues in Toronto sometimes they'll get the same budget I do, but they only have to do 2 events with it. So there's sometimes this misconception that South Asian weddings have these big budgets, and they absolutely do, but they also have more requirements as well. I also feel with cultural weddings, you just have to become knowledgeable on the customs and traditions, and not just like have it in your head, but you have to talk about them at the meetings. You have to actually describe the process and understand the flow of it, because I find that, I know you always say you have a laser focused BS meter, so do a lot of couples, and they know if you're like faking it, and it's like very obvious, and you have to be very careful, not careful, you have to be very confident with the information, because they will like sense that, they'll sense that weakness right away. So I will literally, like, again, it's second nature to me now, but if for someone who's just starting and wants that market, become very well versed in those customs and traditions, but also very well versed in how those days flow, because there's a very specific flow as well. I highly recommend being involved in those cultural weddings before you do your own. There's so many intricacies involved. I know it sounds extreme, but I would do at least 5 to 10 South Asian weddings or cultural weddings before trying to do it yourself, because there's so many learning experiences. There's so many intricacies and nuances to how things are handled. Just like me going into another culture, I would never want to offend anyone or say the wrong thing or not conduct myself a certain way. Same thing goes for a South Asian wedding. Like, you just want to be very well informed, and I would highly recommend having at least 5 to 10 under your belt before you try to like go for it on your own.
It is a lot of moving parts and a lot of details and a lot of unspoken things that you just know if you're familiar with the culture.
Right.
Like there are in any culture. I mean, a Catholic wedding is very different from a Jewish wedding, but you don't necessarily realize that if you're familiar with the nuances of both, because it just comes second nature to you.
It does. And there's like a way that you're conducting yourself. Like, as much as I hate to say it, there's a very specific way I have to conduct myself with that client. Like there are certain expectations in that cultural group. Like I joke about it, but bargaining is a very big factor. Like negotiation is a very big factor. So taking a proposal at face value just doesn't always happen. And when it does, you're like, what just happened here? Like they just signed, like there's no questions, like I don't get it. And so we're just ready for that, right? Like, and sometimes not everyone is ready for that. Like to be sitting in front of a client and to be able to help them understand, because they will dissect that quote right in front of you. You have to be able to help them understand why you're making the suggestions, why the design should go in this direction, why we're recommending you don't remove this from the quote or from the design. It's not enough to just say, well, oh, it's for aesthetic reasons. Like there has to be like a very elaborate reasoning for really everything that's on the quote, because I feel in this group, it's expected of you to know and to be able to, I guess you could say, defend. I don't like to use that word, but defend what you've quoted.
Right. I think that's such a good point, because for people in cultures where negotiation isn't a thing, it's the price on the sticker is what you pay. I think there's this misconception that negotiation is the client being cheap or not trusting you. Right. And that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of deeper cultural connotations of why negotiation is a practice, and it's not just South Asian cultures, it's a lot of cultures all over the world, and they far outnumber the cultures that don't tend to negotiate. Right. And so I think approaching it with that defensive attitude of, oh, you're not really interested in a luxury event, or you can't really afford me. Or I heard someone say, if a client tries to negotiate, we're not the planner for them because we know they aren't actually interested in the vision behind it. And like, that's not true. That's a cultural difference. And even in the cultures that don't necessarily negotiate, there are careers within that culture where it's expected. So if your clients are CEOs or executives or attorneys, they're going to be more prone to do that, even if they don't come from an area that typically does.
That's right.
I do think in the luxury space, there are a lot of misconceptions about it, but people tend to think everyone just spends the same amount of money across the board and everything they buy is luxury. And if it doesn't have a label, whatever. And in truth, it's a mix of high, low, and everything. And different priorities for people. Some people prioritize flowers. Some people prioritize photography. I always tell this story because I know this woman who is insanely wealthy. And she would host these elaborate parties, beautiful linens, beautiful floral, amazing food, bring in like name celebrity entertainers to sing at these parties. And the chairs, they weren't even the folding padded chairs. They were those resin ones that get really dirty really fast, that are like less than $1 each. She would never, her designer couldn't get her to upgrade them. The planner couldn't get her to upgrade them. The florist, no one, her daughters, like no one could get her because she was just like, why? What a waste of money. No. Right. It's like, so none of her events could be used in portfolios because the chairs ruined everything.
And you're so right. It is priorities, and it's not about people not wanting to spend, but I also feel like sometimes they just don't know any better. Like if I don't present the option to them, they might not even know that option exists. So I've always like quoted, even sometimes when I shouldn't have, I've always quoted full vision, because in some cases my clients just don't know that those are ideas that to entertain. Like I didn't know you could have an urn like that. I didn't know you could have a chair like that. And all of a sudden you take someone who you think is like kind of on the fence and you've taken them in another direction. And then on the flip side, you do have those where the full vision scares them. And then they're like, I'm not even going to talk to you any further because this number just doesn't work. I can't compute this number. Does it even make sense for us to continue chatting?
Right.
And so
Right.
they have these like two extremes. And I always like tell those clients, like, this is like a menu of ideas. By no means am I asking you to spend this amount. This is your opportunity, my opportunity to show you why you came to a design firm. And this is my vision for you. And now let's work on this and let's see where we can take it. But I do get a client every now and then who just doesn't even want to entertain that. They're just like, your number is too big. Like, I'm moving on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
Because if they already know that going in, there's a difference between sticker shock with the financial ability beyond that and sticker shock with budget constraints. And I think sticker shock in the industry is normal because people usually haven't entertained on this scale before, especially if it is their first child getting married. And, you know, you hear the averages in the news reports, which are averages, but the luxury end and a multi-day event are going to be well beyond that. So a dad might hear, you know, for a typical Saturday one event wedding, you know, the parents of the bride or whoever's paying might be thinking, well, if the national average in the US is around $30,000, we're having a luxury event, so we'll probably come in about 60, maybe 75 if we splurge, right? Like they've doubled it and even beyond that. So in their minds, first of all, that's a lot of money, no matter what.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we get so used to the numbers. It's like if you work in a bank and you handle money all day, like you just get used to it and you forget like, oh, I just handled like hundreds of thousands of dollars today and didn't even realize it. Like, what is this world we live in? So I think when we're in it and we're like, well, this is what this flower costs, and this is what production costs, and this is what labor costs, and all of that type of thing. And yeah, your linen includes them taking it back in and dry cleaning it and steaming them and all of that. Like there's costs built in that aren't just, oh, I can go to Joann's and get some fabric and sew it myself. It's like, well, have fun. Have fun doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
So I do think there's the sticker shock, obviously, but also just that education in the beginning of this is what things cost, not just because of the labor and product prices behind it, but you are coming to a design firm, like you are hiring an artist, you can get this less somewhere else, but you're not, you're here.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you refer to your company as a design firm and not as necessarily a florist. Can you talk a little bit about the mindset behind that and what drove that decision?
Yeah, I learned, I didn't always call myself a design firm. I learned to start using that term because I wanted to be seen as a service provider. And I didn't want let's see if I can explain this correctly. I didn't want my quotes to be a bunch of products that you're renting. I wanted my quotes to be a bunch of products that you're renting, but have been curated for you. Like we thought about why we're suggesting these products, where there's a design fee, there's a design service fee, there's a production fee. Like in my opinion, wrapping all those numbers into the per item cost was not helping my business because the client couldn't visualize how a linen that was, let's say like $40 a table, why it was now 60, because I had my design services in there, my production, all of it was built into that linen. So the optics of that were very confusing. And on the flip side for me, I didn't want my products to dictate what my service fee was, what my design firm service fee was. And I'm not sure if I'm explaining that correctly, but as a result, everything is dissected on my quote. So there's the design fee, there's an itemized list of all the products required to produce the design, and then all the production and delivery fees. This helps me to help, I guess, psychologically in some way, help the client understand that you're coming to me for more than product, and this is a service consulting company first, and not just product. I don't know if I explained that correctly.
I think you explained it very well. For your design fee, How do you set that up? Is it based on a percentage? Is it a flat fee? Is it based hourly? Because I know there's a lot of different models. Some people have, an advertising agency model, attorney model, where they charge by the hour, which can get very complicated when you have different levels of people working on an event.
Yes, we do a flat fee, and we have an internal understanding. We've kind of quantified what it usually takes to do a certain level of event, and we've based those numbers on that. So our design fee in the background is our estimate on how long it's going to take us administratively and from a design perspective to work on an event. And so we've already established some of those benchmarks behind the scenes. So in my market, the per hour thing was not working for us. There was too much uncertainty, and we got a lot of pullback from clients. And I think it became a confidence issue with them, unfortunately. So we tried that out. It didn't really work. And the percentage fee, a lot of my colleagues do that here. I chose the flat fee. It seems to jive the best with the people coming through my doors. And but we have tried everything, but that for me worked the best. So we decided over time, if we have a 5-day event, this is the time commitment. If we have a 3-day event, a 1-day event, so we've kind of figured it out. And sometimes we're over, sometimes we're under, but in our case, it evens out overall, for the year.
Okay. And do you build into that your perspective, the value of your brain and design eye?
Truthfully, not as much as I should.
Okay.
And so it's a combination of my design time. So all the ideating I'm doing, but also the administrative time that it takes to prepare contracts and do site visits and to do all those kind of procedural things. I, at the moment, don't think that my number for that is high enough, but my way of kind of counteracting that is there is a slight premium on the per item cost of all of the decor elements going into the job. So I kind of disguise some of that in the product, but for the most part, most of it is captured in that design fee.
Okay. I'm going to be bossy for a second and tell you to figure that out this year.
I want to figure it out, and I wish I could. I wish I had the ability to really think about how I could have a design fee that is the true number, and I didn't have to disguise it in my product fee. I actually wish I could do that. I just feel like in the past when I've tried that, I've got a lot of pullback, mainly because I'm only one of a very handful of people who in my market charge a design fee to begin with. And so it becomes very hard. As much as I like to say, when someone comes through my door, they're going to book with me no matter what because of my reputation. That's not a true statement. Numbers do trump my ideas sometimes. And so people are going to go where the number works for them, understandably. And it's in those cases that my numbers go sometimes much higher because I charge for my ideas. Maybe not as much as I should, but I charge what I feel I can in a market that I feel like I can in a market that I think can understand that number and can comprehend. Right. Yeah.
Do you find though that people then take the product numbers and Google it and say, oh, but I can find this on, Jamali Garden or whatever for much cheaper? Do you run into that with the actual product costs?
Not very often. People do know coming to our firm, there's an implied premium. And that's not me trying to be boosting myself. There's people just know that coming to my firm, I have a reputation for that. If you want something amazing outside the box, you're coming to me. So when people walk in the door, there is that, but sometimes I feel I lose jobs because I don't think people think it's as much as it ends up being. And so that's they walk in my door and I'm like, okay, I'm going somewhere where I know it's going to cost me more to produce my event, but I'm okay with it. And then there's the client who's comes in and is okay with it, but then really sees the number and sometimes is not okay with it. And I guess I don't mind losing a job over if somebody else had a better design idea or design solution. I do get a bit worked up when I lose a job based on price because I know what I'm bringing to the table. I verbalize it. I try to communicate it through all of my materials that whether it's like communicative materials, my social media presence, all of that. So to some extent, I think it works, but I do have to sometimes accept that not everyone wants to spend that, or maybe some people just can't afford to spend that.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is valid. And again, going back to a lot of people start out in the industry thinking I'm going to be the affordable person, and then they realize that's typically not sustainable if you're not doing volume.
Right. That's a whole volume. And I mean, when you bring that up, like that's why we have a whole rentals division for people who want our pieces, but can't really make the numbers don't make sense as a full service. So they can rent pieces from us. So we had to kind of introduce that as our way to gain some access to the mid-tier market, because I focused so heavily from the beginning as being like the luxury event designer that I ignored those two other markets. And it's the mid-tier market that I've learned to understand that has a lot of purchasing power. And I have a business that's not even doing anything for them. And so we did these like design collections. We've done a whole rentals program in an attempt to try to get some of that piece of the pie. And ironically, it's hard for us to get in there because we've worked so hard to be the luxury event design firm that going to the mid-tier has proven a little bit more difficult for us than we thought it was going to be.
That makes sense.
Which is, I never thought that would be a thing, but it's totally a thing. We have to play a different game at the mid-tier level, and we definitely have to play a different game when we're doing the rentals part of it. It's such a different type of client that I have to morph when I'm talking. Whether like I have to morph as a person when I'm talking to somebody from one of those markets, because how I speak and how I present my ideas to one market is like, I'll lose them if I speak like that in a different tier of market. And so I'm continuing to figure that out.
Right. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on your business and the event industry in Toronto?
I would say I can't speak for everyone. I'll speak for myself and kind of what we have had to think about and change and adjust and morph and mutate and all of that. So for us, it became very apparent when the pandemic hit that we have to be a design firm that provides a decor or rental service as well. It's not enough to be one of those or be in one category. So it took a lot of effort at the beginning of the year to establish what that meant for us, because in some ways, I know this sounds bizarre, but I didn't want to dilute what I had done for my design service by providing solutions that were mid or low tier. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory way. I just from like people like this funding that's happening with us. And we had to think about, what does that mid-tier market look for? What does a lower end market look for? And it was very clear that some were very price focused. So at some levels, it wasn't really about the design. It was just about meeting a number. In other instances, it was somebody who had great style, great taste, but simply couldn't afford for us to make that happen. And then there was the people who just wanted to do it themselves. And so by identifying those three, we came up with what we are calling our signature collections. So they're pre-designed solutions that I've designed myself that gives you our kind of quote unquote signature look, but at a much more reasonable number, given that there's no design fees or high production fees involved in producing it. It's product that is in our inventory, so we can afford, like quote unquote, afford to provide it at that price. And then the rentals part is for the person who wants to do it themselves, or for another design firm or just decor company, maybe they want to rent some of our pieces. So now our pieces are available to more people because it only was available for our clients beforehand. And so that was like part one of our strategy, is diversifying what we currently, like what we did and what we now have to do, because I don't think it's even a temporary solution. It's something that we have to like continue working on for at least the next 3 years to really acknowledge that not everyone may have the same spending power, or our like luxury market has shrunk a little bit, and we can't be so focused on that one market. We need to be able to service 2 other markets. I also it was a wake up call that the pandemic is not going to be about hosting lavish events, and people are going to be a bit more careful how they spend their money. So you know what, I do need to put the time into birthdays and anniversaries and 10-person events. Like it's been an education for me because I'm so used to designing at a certain level that I had to kind of like think about, okay, well, how am I going to design this whole event for this amount? Like, I don't even know, like I couldn't fathom how these things are going to come together. And I realized that we have to bring in more product into our own inventory in order to be able to provide these design solutions at reduced numbers. And you know what, some of my clients are still spending the same amount of money, whether they had 100 people or 50 people. And so that market hasn't changed, but the number of people in that market for us has changed. I can't operate this business on just that market anymore. In this like economic condition, I do need to be open and flexible, and I have to just continue to grow in a way that I can service my other 2 markets in a very fair way. I don't want my customer service to be affected. I still want people to feel like they're getting the Paras events experience, but just in different ways. And a lot of the beginning of the year was just figuring out, what does that look like and how are we going to do that?
Right. I think that's great. And I do think there are, especially in the luxury market, especially with millennial and Gen Z clients, there is a lot of people who like to host parties or put on their own event out of the creativity of it. They want to make their own floral arrangements, and they'll hire you for a wedding or a gala or a corporate event that they're connected to, you know, because they don't want to take on all that responsibility and they really do want to be the guest. But for a 25-person baby shower or bridal shower in their backyard, even pre-pandemic, it's fun for them to do the florals themselves. Maybe one of their friends likes to bake and it's like their stress baker, especially now. I mean, and especially with the explosion of YouTube, now, if I need to know something, I'm like, okay, YouTube University, I had to learn how to, like, I wanted to make these cupcakes for, I don't know, it's like a dinner party or something. I'm not going to hire anyone to do this, but I wanted to know how to pipe the frosting in a certain way for this cupcake. Yes. And I just went on YouTube and learned. I'm not going to go to a high-end bakery that I would use for another event for a dozen cupcakes for a dinner party. You know what I mean? So there is a lot of that, you know, and again, going back to just examples from my life, like if I'm hosting a bridal shower, if I'm throwing a baby shower, my sister's baby shower, I just drove my little SUV down to the rental company, picked up the 12 chairs, threw them in the back, drove back. Like, I'm not going to necessarily, I can do those things. And for a bigger event, I would bring in a planner.
That's right.
I like doing that stuff. It's why I was a planner for a while.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and you're totally right. And we're seeing that, like, and our rentals program is, I'm hoping, going to like help with that kind of, because I do have a lot of past couples, past brides in particular, who are then hosting a birthday party. But like you said, they take pride in doing it themselves. Like they want to put all that love into the event. And so they'll just like rent a bunch of chargers, or I have one at the beginning of October where she's renting the chargers, the chairs, and the and all the candlelight for the table. And she's gone through our rentals division. There's no design fee involved. I'm happy to help her with that. Like, it just seems like a really good natural progression. But I think the big thing for me was I didn't see that as an opportunity. I was so like closed off to that. I'm like, I in a way, I was kind of like fighting it in my head. I'm like, I spent so much time establishing our firm as this. Now I'm going to do this. Like, am I going to confuse people? Am I diluting what I do for my luxury events? I had all these like things going on in my head. So actually hearing you say what you're saying makes me feel like some of what we're doing is going in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, it also keeps it keeps the money coming in your doors instead of competitors' doors.
Yes.
But it keeps you top of mind with those clients,
right.
for when they do need something bigger, or for when their friend needs something bigger and they can say, oh, this is where I always go. I always go to Paras events to get my rentals. You should, like, he can do design. He's amazing. There's a lot of that. Do you feel like there was a fear of what other people would think if you started going into the lower spend markets?
Oh, like 300%. When I say like diluting the brand, that's exactly what I'm referencing. It's like, oh, like, am I going to be like the person now who's like going to do that? Like, and it sounds so snobby, but I'm like, am I going to be the person who does that kind of event now? Like, like it's just, I don't like to think that, but that's where my head was going. And I'm like, what are other people going to think? Like, oh, all these people are doing all these like beautiful high-end parties during the pandemic. And I feel like I'm doing a birthday, like that's, and it sounds so like snobby and oversimplified, but those are like the thoughts that go through my head when I'm making a decision like that. Because a lot of what we do on Instagram is admittedly is like not just marketing, but letting everyone else know like what I'm working on too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Impressing colleagues, not just clients.
Exactly. That's a big part of like, as much as like, I don't think many people say it, like it's totally a thing. Like, I can't wait for these people to see what I like, never mind how many leads am I going to get from this job? Like, no, I want to know more what my colleagues think. And it's an interesting dynamic. It's an interesting mind game.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that because it is real. And we don't like to admit that's real, but I think all of us have a couple people that we try to impress in the industry that we want their approval. We want not necessarily everyone's, but like we want those specific people to be like, oh, they've still got it. They're really good. Or, oh, they should, like, oh, I don't know how I overlooked them or whatever.
Right. Well, I also feel like, and this is just more of like just me as a person, but like even when I go to like different networking events or conferences and stuff, like I want to connect with people, not because I think there's like a business opportunity. I just want to be in their space, and I want them to know what I'm working on, and because I know what they're working on. They're like people I look up to, and so I think a lot of Instagram is like that too. Like, look at what I'm working on too. It's like a way for us to share what we're doing, sometimes without like the face-to-face.
Right.
And the reaction of what that face-to-face is.
Right.
Yeah.
What are you most looking forward to when all of this is wrapped up, or as wrapped up as it's going to get?
I think there's like two things. So one, from a business perspective, I'm just looking forward to seeing how my new business model is going to work after the pandemic is over, or once it's eased up a bit. Is having 3 tiers of business the right thing to do long term? Or is it the right thing to do long term? And then from a personal perspective, I think just like we were saying at the beginning, like being able to like leave the country without having to like have like my whole kit of like sanitizer and my mask and everything, and like going to a vacation and being on vacation and not worrying about being like physically distanced and that. So I think those are probably like my 2 like big things right now that I would love for my rentals business to really explode, to be honest. I love being able to source furniture from different countries and like design new pieces for us to offer here in Toronto. There's something that's very exciting about that for me. And I hope that a lot of what we're doing right now and all the effort we're putting into it right now will allow us to continually expand on the rental side of the business and the subsequent collections.